According to Wikipedia, the USA was involved in over 105 wars, conflicts, and rebellions since its inception in 1776. However, one specific engagement has been left out, which is interesting because it may well mark the very first interplanetary engagement in history. So this engagement took place during World War II, though there are sort of two variants to the story. One puts it on like December 9th or 10th, a few days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, whereas the other story puts it in like early 1945 in January or February as the American military is preparing to attack Iwo Jima. One thing the sources do agree on is that something was spotted in the sky and the crew went to battle stations after they were afraid of, well, one or two things. If it happened in 1941, the crew was probably worried about the fact that, hey, that could be a Japanese recon plane and we don't want to get Pearl Harbor 2.0'd. Or if it was 1945 and the Americans are sailing towards a Japanese island in the Pacific, they might be weary and worried that this is one of those new famous prototype sort of secret weapons. Now, the Japanese had started sending these balloons over. It was pretty secretive at the time, and I'm not super familiar with how many people on these boats knew what was going on back home, but the Japanese started sending balloon bombs with the intent to set a forest fire in the American Pacific Northwest. And it may have been the case that some people heard about this through letters or news, and that they were worried, hey, if we don't shoot that thing down, it may cause a fire back home. Okay, so the anti-aircraft crews train their guns, load the shells, and send them to 5,000 feet. Fire a couple rounds, flak explodes, black cloud goes away, and nothing's happened. Okay, 6,000 feet then, 7,000 feet, 8,000 feet. They get to firing about 300 rounds and go up to at least 10,000 feet. Eventually, like after those 300 rounds, the navigator says, guys, cut it out. They were shooting at the planet Venus according to his calculations. However, one of the crew was debriefed and remarked, and I'm not making this up, we must have hit something because when I look at the planet on pictures, I could see there was pockmarks on it. A little cool thing is, through some modern technology, we can actually determine how far Venus was away from Earth if we're taking December in 1941 or January, February in 1945. And the distance is like 62 to 88 million kilometers, which is the same distance as if we were to fly from New York to Paris, between like 14 and 17,000 times. So I don't know if they were ever going to hit Venus. They definitely did give it a good old college try. Mistaking a planet that is tens of millions of kilometers away for a target a lot closer to you, I guess I could see that happen in 1941 or even 1945. However, it happened again in 1948, allegedly, and guaranteed in 2011. So as a kid, I loved reading all sorts of books, mostly historical based ones, though a book my dad owned called Chariots of the Gods, was a lot about UFOs and unexplained theories and stuff. One of the topics of that book was the 1948 Mantell Incident, in which a U.S. Air Force captain of the Kentucky Air National Guard lost his life chasing down a potential UFO. So the main character of this story is Captain Thomas Mantell, which the incident is named after. He was a D-Day veteran. He flew C-47s over Europe and over Normandy, had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Crosses, but it was a bunch of other awards. This wasn't just like an average Joe or a guy green from the academy. We're talking about someone with some experience. Him and three of his wingmen were flying out over Kentucky in 1948 when they were told to chase after an unidentified flying object. Now, one of his wingmen had to abort the pursuit rather quickly as he was low on fuel, and later his other two wingmen also aborted. Mantell, badass as he is, keeps climbing. Now, the service ceiling of a P-51, I want to say, is in the 40,000s of feet, but that's hard when you don't have oxygen on you. At about 20,000 feet, he radios in to the tower. I'm still climbing. The object is above and ahead of me. Official reports say that Mantell climbed up to about 25,000 feet. His plane comes screaming down and actually manages to somehow catch fire before it impacts on the ground. However, sadly, Mantell does not survive the crash of his plane. A lot of weird theories start popping up about what actually happened. People were speculating it could have been aliens or perhaps some sort of new secret prototype rocket or weapon, though the US Air Force themselves quickly refer to Venus, there's our friend Venus again,
hello there,
as the main culprit, that Mantell and the other pilots and everyone on the ground had somehow mistaken Venus for an aircraft. But a little while later, people started to think about that a little differently because that wasn't 100% the truth. In 1952, astronomers and other scientific experts had figured out that they could not have seen Venus that day. Venus wouldn't have been bright enough, there would have been too much of a thick haze, so whatever happened, it probably wasn't Venus. So the US Air Force had to come up with a different theory or a different explanation because they couldn't blame Venus anymore. They then said, well, we're sorry to lie to you. We didn't think it was Venus. We knew it wasn't Venus. It was actually a secret sort of prototype weather balloon called the Skyhook, which not a lot of people would have known about at the time and was actually very secretive, but no records have ever been found that indicate a Skyhook balloon would have been over Kentucky that day. So the real cause of the Mantell incident may honestly not be ever known, whether it was Venus, a Skyhook balloon, aliens, or the Russians with the rocket that flew all the way to Kentucky, shot down Mantell, and then went back to the Soviet Union and never used that specific weapon again. I don't really think it was the last one. One thing needs to be mentioned, Mantell, though an experienced pilot with a bunch of awards, wasn't actually as experienced in the P-51, though any of that doesn't really take away the fact that people, including the tower personnel, people on the ground, and 3 of Mantell's wingmen all claimed to have seen something. It might explain why Mantell pushed his P-51 so far and so high to the point where he may have blacked out and lost consciousness. So finally, I have one more story regarding Venus, and this time it's kind of eye-opening in a weird way. So in 2011, Air Canada pilots were actually allowed to go for 40-minute naps on intercontinental flights, allegedly increasing their alertness and their responsiveness. I kind of think that's a little scary, but I guess there's more people in the cockpit than just a one sleeping pilot, but still a little bit unnerving. So on board of this Air Canada flight, the first officer has actually been asleep for 70 minutes, a little longer than the allotted 40. The captain wakes him up and just says, hey, just letting you know, there is a US Air Force C-17 cargo plane about 1,000 feet below us, but we're most likely going to be crossing paths here very soon. The first officer is like, oh, what are you talking about? And he sees a light in front of the cockpit, grabs the controls like all, sleepily and groggily, pushes the plane down from 35,000 feet to about 34,500 feet, but almost instantly, he's really trying to evade this light. It turns out that what he saw was the planet Venus. Big surprise, I guess you could have guessed that by the video at this point, but he saw Venus, and experts actually agreed and said, yeah, Venus that night would have been about 10 times brighter than the next brightest star. Furthermore, it's not actually uncommon, apparently, for pilots to, I guess, confuse Venus for another aircraft because the light is always bright and, again, is much brighter than other stars on specific nights or even during the day. However, pilots don't usually try to evade Venus because they realize that Venus is 50 to 80 million kilometers away from Earth, but perhaps the combination of being rudely awoken, probably shouldn't have been sleeping for 70 minutes though, and then seeing this light may have forced the first officer to take some crazy actions. And it's a good thing the captain was there, or we may have had a mid-air collision between a Boeing 767 and a US Air Force C-17 in 2011. Finally, on a personal note, Carly and I are really appreciating all the support on our new content. We cannot wait to bring you a ton more though, so stay tuned, and if you haven't yet, subscribe.